Hey, Shannon.
Hi, Libby.
Do you have any plans for Saturday, October 4th?
I do actually. I'm going to be right here in National Landing in Crystal City to attend the AI Unlocked Festival.
What is the AI Unlocked Festival?
Funny you should ask. So, SCSP is hosting a full day of AI plus science, arts, music, storytelling, all the fun things that AI can unlock for our societies. You should come and bring your family and friends.
Where can I sign up?
Well, you could go to scSP.ai and just register there.
We look straight forward to seeing you there.
The learnings out of Kyiv were, well, we've got to get into Taiwan, we've got to help build their drone army to deter rather than to defend.
It's good to have these partnerships, both so we can all learn as allies and partners from our experiences in other parts of the world, but also because we are all on the same side. We're all facing this shared threat.
We're moving away from this model of multi-million-dollar, really expensive hardware towards something that's, more attritable, as they say, or expendable, something that you're a little less worried about losing on the battlefield because you're able to make so many of so quickly and so cheaply.
Welcome to Strait Forward, a podcast about Taiwan, the island at the center of technological innovation and the global fight for democracy. I'm Channing Lee.
And I'm Libby Lange.
And everybody, today is the first day of fall, so happy fall.
Yes, someone here is very excited.
I'm so excited. I wish I had bought my pumpkin spice latte and prepared that for the episode, but unfortunately we're just stuck with a normal mug of coffee for today.
Next time for sure.
Next time. Libby, you just got back from a trip to Spain. Welcome back. I missed you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure you can see I'm looking very tan.
Very tan. You said you went on the Camino. I've been hearing a lot of people going on this perilous journey. Maybe not so perilous since I made it back. We last talked about some of my Taiwan stories from my summer travels. Did you have a Taiwan story from your trip to Spain?
Yeah, I was really excited after hearing your trip to Turkey and how you had kind of seen that Taiwan element there, and I was really on the lookout. Unfortunately, I did not come across any Taiwanese travelers on the Camino, but one experience I did have actually did kind of, bring this up to the forefront of my brain. While we were walking, my family ran into this group of travelers from China.
Oh.
And of course, my parents, hearing that they could speak Mandarin, called me over and said, Libby, you should talk to these people. You speak Mandarin as well. So we got to talking. They were very friendly, very excited to be there, very excited that I could speak Mandarin, of course.
Yep.
And naturally very curious why this random person could do that. And
they
so,
want to take a picture with you? That
yes,
happens.
Yes. And so I got to explaining, I lived in Taiwan. I lived there for quite a while, blah, blah, blah. And at this time, they were kind of like on video, and they were saying, we're from China. Hello, China. We're here in Spain.
Oh my gosh, so you were live streamed in China.
And as I was saying, I lived in Taiwan, they very quickly said, Taiwan is part of China too. And it really caught me off guard because, it's so omnipresent, even in this kind of day-to-day interaction, you kind of can't get away from that Taiwan-China piece of all of this.
What did you say back?
I was just taken aback, because again, I realized they're on video. I don't know, sort of, I didn't want to get anybody, cause any problems for anyone. And so I kind of just let the moment pass. But yeah, I guess it's, it could have been a real good learning moment. I probably should have plugged Strait Forward now that I'm thinking about it.
All of China could have listened to Strait Forward.
But now I know for next time.
Oh my gosh.
I need to be prepped with my Strait Forward little
pitch.
ad. Yeah.
Well, that's actually such a fascinating story. Probably more interesting than my stories. So thanks for sharing that.
Yes. But now lesson learned for next time.
Well, on that fun note, we actually have more of a serious topic to discuss today. But we'll try to keep it still a little bit more lighthearted and elementary level. Drones. Today we're talking about drones. We've talked about asymmetric capabilities for a long time. We've talked about why Taiwan needs asymmetric capabilities, given that they are a smaller island facing a larger adversary. But I do want to take a step back because I think in the context of recent history, when we think about drones, especially being used for military purposes, we've always thought about those giant multi-million-dollar, like the U.S. Predator, U.S. Reaper, those really big, maybe reconnaissance drones. Frankly, I think the first time I thought seriously about all this was, during the War on Terror, when drones were being used for counterterrorism, and there was a debate about whether or not drones would be the future of war. And the drones that were talked about back then were, an unmanned system being able to maybe facially use facial recognition technology to identify the target and decide whether or not to strike. And that, I think, is before the last few years of talking about AI and autonomy, that was like the conversation about drones. And I remember this just really vividly because I had debates about it in school, and we talked about this and how whether or not it was ethical, right? Because I think the debate was about whether or not, on one hand, if you are just targeting one person instead of having to just bomb everywhere, you can find that one target and just take that one target out, versus, of course, the way that versus, again, killing more civilians, et cetera. And so that was a really interesting introduction for me on what drones were. I don't know if that's the same experience that everybody's had, that everybody else has had when they think about drones. Maybe I just had a very weird childhood.
You were doing a lot more debating, I will say, than I was.
This was my middle school debate topic, not to, really embarrassingly. So I don't know, Libby, what do you think of when you think about drones?
No, I think you make a good point that we're probably all imagining something slightly different when we have this conversation. I think on the other end of some kind of spectrum from that are maybe the drones that I think more of because I've seen them more in my life. Mm-hmm. And those are your commercial drones. So, right, like when you're, I don't know, at a concert or at an amusement park or, I don't know, at a baseball game, sometimes you'll look up and you'll see something floating up in the air. And at least I will be thinking like, I wonder like what they're filming. And sometimes I'm tempted to kind of like look up and wave, but I have no idea if I'm actually in the shot or, what have you. And that's kind of the sort of almost like the limit of my imagination when it comes to drones is something that's very stationary, hovering, maybe moving very slowly, a little bit clumsy. I think back to when drones first became popular with people and we were hearing about how they're flying to places they shouldn't be or crashing into things or hitting birds or whatever.
And how you could just buy one for a few $100s and just have your own personalized drone. And that's really interesting. And I think that already took us from, the war on terror conversation where you have these big multi-million-dollar drones to the ones you can just buy off the shelves. And of course, everybody knows DJI, that is the Chinese company that produces drones. They basically took the entire market, right? Because there's not another company out there, at least at this point in time, that can produce these really cheap technologies, or I guess manufacture just the hardware of it at such speed and scale. And obviously, they're selling it at a very low cost.
Yeah, and I think, the third thing maybe that has really changed all of this is the war in Ukraine, right? I think that the war in Ukraine has completely changed how we talk about drones, how we think about the role of drones in warfare, how we think about manufacturing drones. Mm-hmm. As you talked about, we're moving away from this model of multi-million-dollar, really expensive hardware towards something that's, more attritable, as they say, or expendable, something that you're a little less worried about losing on the battlefield because you're able to make so many of so quickly and so cheaply.
And that cannot be multi-million-dollars that you're losing
exactly
every time you fire. Yeah, so of course, this is a podcast about Taiwan. We know that we want to have this conversation more in depth about drones because it is definitely a technology that already exists, of course, right, as we've been seeing in Ukraine, but is also on the horizon, right? Taiwan actually needs this capability for all the reasons that we're going to get into with our guest, which I'm really excited about. And I will just also say that Taiwan is actually tracking this issue very closely, right? Their government has already announced a series of different initiatives. Taiwan's government is already moving on this. We saw that last fall in September 2024. They announced TEDIBO. This is like a new drone alliance. The acronym is always so long, and I always butcher it.
But can I say the acronym is great? TEDIBO.
TEDIBO is great.
Rolls off the tongue.
What it stands for, Taiwan Excellence Drone International Business Opportunities Alliance. I'm sorry, I have to read it off my computer because it's just so long. But TEDIBO, it was announced, and it really set that high-level priority, right, from the government that said, hey, this is a technology that we need.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the last time that we were in Taiwan and when you were at the Taiwan Expo, you've also had kind of firsthand experience seeing some of the companies that are involved in this and the drones that they're producing.
Yeah, we visited Coretronic in February when we were there. Again, manufacturing drones, thinking about how Taiwan can build this non-red supply chain, how they can source the materials, how they would be able to pull together this manufacturing capability in Taiwan. Yes, of course, in Dallas a few weeks ago when I was there, I also met a few different companies. Thunder Tiger, of course, is like a really big one. They've already landed a lot of different contracts. And the whole idea is the government is, saying, hey, drones are a priority. We need to do this. And then private sector is responding by starting to figure out how to build up the drones that they need. So if you're watching the YouTube video or the video portion of this, we'll put a little clip of some of the drones that I saw at the Taiwan Expo. Sorry if it's a little dated content, but just to give you an idea, these are much smaller systems often remote controlled.
No, I think that's a great call out for what we were talking about earlier. Just, letting people kind of see what we're talking about when we talk about drones, I think is very helpful to give them a mental picture. And today we're very lucky to be joined by, someone who knows everything that there is to be known about drones because he has been working in the space for so long. That is Lorenz Meier. Lorenz is the founder and CEO of Auterion, which is building sort of the open source software stack that is going to be used for the drone swarms of the future. And if that doesn't make a lot of sense to you right now, I promise it will by the end of this interview. But we are very happy to welcome Lorenz on.
Yeah, let's get into it. Hi, Lorenz. Thank you for joining us on Strait Forward.
Thank you for having me. Super exciting to talk about the Indo-Pacific.
And before we dive into that juicy topic, we wanted to ask you to introduce your company. Right, Auterion's been doing amazing things in the drone space, but our listeners might not be super familiar. So can we first ask, what's the big problem that Auterion's trying to solve?
So drones have been a niche, I would say, up until 3 years ago when the Ukraine war started. And units were, in the hundreds. So very big in terms of public perception. A lot of people have their own action camera photography drone. But from a military perspective, they were just one small reconnaissance tool. Now we're seeing millions of drones being deployed in Ukraine. I think that's a precursor for every new conflict. And that creates a fundamentally new problem. As you scale up the numbers, you have to have an integrated kill chain. And now it does matter that they start to run the same software so you can put them together into swarms. And so I would describe my personal motto, we're building swarms, not drones. And we're doing that through what I call the equivalent of Android for drones, one common operating system that runs on all of them. And that is now really needed. And we are scaling up from the low thousands last year into tens of thousands this year. So really large volumes, hundreds of thousands next year. And that shows that this mass scale adoption moment has come. And if you compare that to smartphones, it's a little bit like, I would say, 2007, 2009. Nokia and BlackBerry are still alive. Android is entering the scene. And it's every single computing environment has, in the end, had one open platform for computers that was Windows. For smartphones, it's Android. And one closed. And we want to bring different manufacturers, but also allies and partners onto one common base, because I believe that what we're seeing right now is the pivot, not just from drones to swarms, but also from hardware-defined to software-defined.
And when you say swarms, can I just ask quickly, do you mean that, these drones are kind of able to physically sense each other in space?
Yeah, they're flying information. They're also exchanging targeting data. They are prioritizing targets together through a mesh network. And all of the software, all of the intelligence runs on board. So they get tasked by a human operator. I actually care strongly about that. But once they start to execute, it's all on the swarm itself. So I'm not talking about like an air traffic control tower that sends many drones into one direction. I'm talking about a set of drones that operate like a single entity, like a single thing that has one mission, for example, an air defense installation or ship, and is dividing and conquering that task in the case of the ship. And we actually have had real-world engagements in Ukraine where some of our drones targeted radar installations. In case of a ship, you would send a few drones after the radar to blind the ship, a few drones after maybe the main armament. You would not necessarily sink it, but you would make sure that that swarm is able to disable the ship, to take it out of combat.
Makes a lot of sense as to why this would be relevant for Taiwan, especially as we've talked about the need for Taiwan to have asymmetric capabilities. Thanks for the introduction to your company. Obviously, this is a podcast about Taiwan. What's your Taiwan story? How did you become interested in working in Taiwan? How did your company become interested in doing things with Taiwan? Can you just, tell us about your Taiwan story?
So my Taiwan story actually starts in Ukraine. I've been 7 times in Ukraine, to the point where government officials there asked me if I had moved to Kyiv because they were seeing me all the time. And while traveling, it's a 24-hour trip, because of road transport and everything. Airports are obviously closed. You have a lot of time to think. And one of the thoughts I had is like, well, going into a country where you're under constant threat of airstrikes and being able to help an ally only after it is too late, I promised to myself and my team that we're going to get ahead of the next situation. And there are certainly significant security concerns about Taiwan and the wider Indo-Pacific. And so part of that is the learnings out of Kyiv, were, well, we've got to get into Taiwan. We've got to help build their drone army ahead of time to deter rather than to defend. And so that is, I would say, my Taiwan story is a Kyiv to Taiwan story. And I think we'll get into that in detail throughout this podcast, because there are a lot of learnings. And there are also things that don't apply one-to-one, but I can tell you that drones won't go away, and drones can fly definitely also over maritime distances.
Yeah, I would actually maybe love to start with the learnings that do apply. So some of the things that you have seen come out of Ukraine that you do think Taiwan could learn from, what are some of those lessons from your real-world experience?
So when we talk about the operational environment around Taiwan, and honestly about like any island, it could be Great Britain as well, you have, I would say, 2 defensive missions. One is you want to deter a blockade of an island. And also deterring a blockade would also deter a landing operation. And then if units come through and you do have a landing operation on your shore, you will want to be in a position where you can switch to land combat. In the case of Taiwan, there are long-range drones, and Ukraine is a great example, with a range of 1,500 kilometers or more, that are already today equipped, in our case, with the capability to detect targets with thermal cameras and visible light cameras. And a ship is a pretty big target. So it's not actually too hard to apply some of the deep strike drone technology from Ukraine into a naval domain. And we've seen that with established military systems where cruise missiles are being used against land targets, but also against sea targets. So that's I would say, the longer range engagement. And then at close range, if we're talking about a landing force on a shore, that is very close to the battlefield situation in Ukraine, where you have drones that have maybe only 15 or 30 kilometers range, and are being primarily used against armor. And there, I would argue, it's a one-to-one usage of what has been developed and has been used in Ukraine.
No, that's super fascinating. Of course, you've done a lot in Ukraine, and we've seen this in the last 3 years, and it's great to hear, the logic behind deterring rather than defending. As you've been thinking about, I know you've been traveling to Taiwan a lot ever since then. What do you see as now the challenges that Taiwan faces when trying to think through their drone strategy? Like what are the main considerations that they need to take as they think about how they're going to deploy drones differently than in Ukraine?
I think there are 3 main considerations. One is the different environment. So to consider a naval operation, I actually forgot to mention, we've also partnered with unmanned surface vehicle companies with our software. So we do air, land, and sea. And so we're building a integrated kill chain across domains. So that is one piece that obviously is different. I would say the other two pieces have more to do with technology maturity. Ukraine calls its own drone environment a zoo because they have so many manufacturers, so many different systems. It's a bit chaotic from a supply, training, operations perspective. And so a level of standardization and optimization for logistics in software and hardware is definitely warranted. And we've actually seen that with military technology before, like when cannons got introduced, they were initially not standardized, so munition wasn't exchangeable. We have that with drones right now. They have different sizes, they need different batteries, they need different payloads. That's not very helpful in the military logistics space. Ukraine is starting to standardize this more and more. So I think those are learnings. And then on the software side, and that's where we're helping Ukraine and have formed an official partnership with the government of Taiwan. As you try to integrate the kill chain to deploy drones in the thousands or millions, it is important that they run the same operating system, that they can be part of a wider theater-wide kill chain so that you can strike with autonomous mass and really leverage like numbers. And in particular, Ukraine already is, I would say, a smaller army against a larger army. In the case of Taiwan, it would be even more extreme. In particular there, the force multiplier you get out of automation and one operator being able to send 5, 10, 100 drones is absolutely crucial. And so I would say Ukraine has shown what's feasible with technology, but mostly manually controlled. It's still remotely piloted. Taiwan is leaping forward all the way into autonomy and swarms, and it has to, because it doesn't have the numbers in terms of troops to fight with like one operator and one drone.
So I guess maybe that's one of the kind of advantages of, being able to deter before something happens, is that maybe there's more time for Taiwan to be able to standardize across whether it's your hardware or your software stack. But I know one thing that many people have expressed concern about is sort of production capacity, right? Taiwan is trying to essentially create an industry from the ground up, but for the industry players, they're trying to see sort of what's the capacity there for the government to purchase from us, right? I think there's this new government target of reaching 180,000 drones produced in Taiwan by 2028, which sounds like a large number, and yet when you look at how many drones are being lost every day on the battlefield in Ukraine, it's actually
It's like a tenth of the capacity even now in Ukraine.
Yeah, and so I guess I would love your thoughts from having been there, having worked with some of these companies, and speaking with the government. How realistic is this goal of ramping up to 180,000, and why is it not more?
I think the last question is the right question to ask. Why is it not more? I think, like, if you think about how long it takes to actually assemble a drone, it takes about 2 hours to finish one of these FPV loitering munitions. The parts that go into them are standard consumer parts, so like Taiwan's electronic manufacturing industry has like all the necessary, I would say, infrastructure to do that at low cost and great scale. And if you take 2 hours for a person, that actually means one person can do dozens a week, and quite a significant number in a month, and a really large number in a year. And so the question is more like, well, if you just put like 500 people to work here, which is not crazy, like you could do much more than 180,000. And I also don't think it takes 3 years to ramp. I think it takes 3 months to ramp. And so if anything, I would encourage a country to go way more aggressive on its drone strategy and to build that capacity. In the case of Ukraine, these manufacturing hubs are actually distributed throughout the country. So they're very, very hard to disrupt because there are just too many of them. It's not it doesn't even make sense to target them from the air. because they're not winning. And so why not produce in greater numbers, make sure that the industry is being stood up? And there's such a demand right now from allies and partners, and the cost sensitivity is significant. Even with U.S. Army, they're not willing to pay significantly more than the price points in Ukraine. And so, with all that said, I think ambition on more volume manufacturing would make a lot of sense.
I mean, we joked earlier about, how Taiwan's this manufacturing hub for the world, and why can't they build 100 million drones or even 1 million drones a week or a year or a month? Other than just like these higher level government goals, do you see other real challenges to scaling this manufacturing? I mean, you are a software company, right? And you actually need that hardware capacity in Taiwan, or are there other places near Taiwan that maybe should be doing this manufacturing? Yeah, what are like some other bottlenecks other than just the government not having that high enough goal?
I think once you get into it, I'm sure there will be learnings. For example, like the electronics are already, as the Taiwanese call it, red-free. Some other components are available on the market, but maybe not as, they're not as deep supply chains, like electronic motors, for example. And so I think just doing it for a few 10,000 will surface these bottlenecks. But what I want to emphasize is, again, there is no manufacturing shortage or real bottleneck. It's just a function of getting into it. I'm not worried at all about the industrial capacity because of the knowledge we have, but also if you look at Ukraine and the speed at which it's set up an industry that can manufacture 4 million drones a year, that's a very solvable problem. And so my main concern would be more that governments in the West overall are in the analysis paralysis, where everybody admires the problem of industrial capacity, where everybody admires the problem of supply chains, but then no government puts down like a few $1 million here or there and basically says like, hey, I'm going to order, give you an example, I'm going to order 100,000 electric motors a year. And I don't know as a government yet which exact size, because things might change. That's, by the way, the big horror of governments, that they buy drones now that they're outdated next year. And I'm going to pay for that, and I'm going to prepay something. And so I want 2 or 3 national vendors to set up manufacturing lines for that. And it's like, I think we did an analysis, a motor manufacturing line is like $3 million. So on a global GDP scale,
That's actually not a lot.
we're talking about jokes here, really? And then they could just bring that industrial capacity to life. And it's things like this where the problem gets overanalyzed rather than just putting orders down and willing the industry into existence. And I think that's missing domestically in the US. It's missing in Taiwan. The Europeans are in no way, shape, or form better, even though they're really close to the front line in Ukraine. And I think there's a big confusion on the policy level that I want to call out here, and that is that drones, just because they fly, get confused with fighter jets and antiquated, or tanks and antiquated supply chains that are being run by companies that have had to survive 60 years of peace. So they're geared for slowness. But if you look back at the bombers we built during World War II and shipped to Europe, I mean, completely different scale. And that was possible within months. Like, we should not forget, right? World War II started with more or less biplanes, ended more or less with jet fighters, and took, depending on how you count, anywhere between 4 and 6 years. We're now in year 3 of the Ukraine war, we have no industrial capacity in the West. And that's really, I mean, that's a real concern. And that's a policy issue. That's not an industrial base issue.
No, I mean, I was actually at the Air and Space Museum near Dulles Airport this weekend and literally walked through the innovation of our fighter jets, of our planes, of our all, even helicopters. We saw the really, really tiny little mini jets, and then all the way to the ginormous reconnaissance planes. And it's funny that you say this because, I mean, we've talked about how national security is ultimately a market failure, right? There has to be government direction to fill this gap. And it seems like what you're suggesting is that our government needs to just recognize that a $3 million investment in building drones that might be thrown away anyways is worth it in order to build up that industrial capacity. So it's great to hear that, especially from the private sector perspective, because you're right. Sometimes I think I like your term, analysis paralysis, right? We're just talking about the problem and not realizing the solution. So no, I appreciate that. You mentioned allies and partners. If you don't mind, I want to pull on that thread a little bit. First, actually, you were just in Japan, in Korea, and Taiwan. Can you tell us a little bit about how the region is feeling about drones at the moment?
I would say they're waking up to it. That's a general sentiment. I think in Taiwan we formed an official partnership with the government on helping them to bring our software capacity to their industry and help them benefit from the combat and battlefield learnings we've made in Ukraine. In South Korea, we had some really good meetings with the government. They are very, very early in their thinking, which is interesting because North Korea is actively involved in the war, and the front line the armistice line in Korea is very, very similar to the front line in Ukraine. It's a frozen conflict. It's it's with a gray zone like the DMZ, with huge minefields. Like, it's actually not so different to large parts in Ukraine. And you could assume that if a conventional war would break out, it would be looking very, very similar to combat in Ukraine. And so I think there should be some real urgency in South Korea, definitely. And again, they're building momentum into it, but they're very, very early. They're really only starting this year. And Japan is very similar. Japan just released, I think 2 weeks ago or so, a new government budget that is emphasizing autonomy as a defense priority, and where they're spending real dollars. And so I think, again, they did their analysis that autonomy is important, but they don't have a local industry just yet. And I would describe that as the general situation in the region. Taiwan definitely has, for example, already done live fire tests with one of our industry partners called Thunder Tiger, and put a munition on a drone and struck a target on a range. So that's real results and real urgency. I think in South Korea and Japan we're a year or two behind that, but everybody has started to move.
And are people, I guess, in that context, thinking at all about interoperability beyond, I guess, getting their manufacturing lines off the ground? Are they thinking of a future where people's drones need to be able to work together in some way?
I think they're discovering that, and I think part of the reason is, or I think there are two reasons. Number one, I think all those governments need to do more exercises where they war game modern technology drones against their existing assets, because they will realize that the kill chain has become so fast that classic means of coordination and communication, which right now is mostly voice radio and PowerPoint or a map in a command center, like a physical map, is not going to work. And that they're going to be outmatched before they even can take a decision. So I think that has to still sink in, that it's not just you have spending on the equipment itself, but you also have to change your force design and how you make decisions across the kill chain. So I think that is something that still needs to be learned and changes things fundamentally. And it also means that, again, like you need to integrate all of your assets, manned and unmanned, into one common operating picture and close those thousands of kill chains with the maximum amount of automation possible. I'm not arguing for full autonomy. I think it always should be a human commander who makes a decision. But you can certainly make, I would say, higher level command decisions, like you're deciding that you're taking out a grid on the map, and instead of doing that like the last 80 years, like in the last 80 years with artillery, you're doing it with drones now. It's the same decision. It's like, we are going to take out this grid. Same thing for naval targets. You can decide to engage radar reflections that are most likely enemy ships in this sector, knowing that you have evacuated civilian ships before. And so those things should still be human, but the rest needs to be automated significantly more, needs to be integrated. And those integrations, if let's say you have 50 different manufacturers, you have to do 50 times. And you have to maintain them 50 times, and you have to test them 50 times, and that's simply impossible. And for the same reasons, in the civilian world, we have seen the emergence of common software, common operating systems, because companies realize that if they do everything bespoke, it's way too expensive. And it's also brittle. And that is why I think the whole region will come, I mean, Taiwan is already there, but the other countries will realize that as well, will come to the realization that they need to prioritize building their kill chains around software. And that also includes the back end, things like Maven Smart System, that doesn't run on the edge like our software does, but they will need that. And we are actively driving towards exercises on the national level with these militaries, as well as with allies and partners, that I think will serve as very, very direct, obvious, and blunt examples why that's absolutely needed.
So I thought your original answer to Libby's question was going to be, of course, that's where we come in. Because, yeah, exactly as you said, right? It seems like this drone industry, it's still rather nascent, right? You mentioned drone army at the beginning, right? I don't think any nation necessarily has a drone army right now. I don't even know if I would describe Ukraine or Russia, right, and their ability to scrap pieces together from around the world to build drones and fly them. I wouldn't call that a drone army. So it seems like it's great that, you know, your company is doing this work ahead of time before something worse happens. I do want to turn the conversation a little bit back to Taiwan, though, right? It's great that Japan and Korea are thinking through this, but of course, Taiwan, right? What is Taiwan doing in the drone space, and what is Taiwan doing with you? I wanted to ask you about the different partnerships that Auterion has announced in the last year or so. Congratulations, by the way. Seems really, really awesome. I know you announced over the summer a collaboration with the National Zhongshan Institute of Science and Technology, NCSIST, as well as Thunder Tiger, that private drone company that you mentioned. I actually met them at the Taiwan Expo a couple of weeks ago, and they had wonderful things to say about you. Can you tell us about what you're building together with both the National Institute and with Thunder Tiger, and also, of course, Taiwan's government?
So it's very easy, an integrated kill chain, but you probably want to hear more than a one-word summary. So let me describe the things that are powered by our software. So you can think of like a big screen, one common operating picture, a map on which you see the different swarms you're commanding in the air, on land, at sea. And then being able to find, fix, and finish targets across these different types of unmanned systems. So you can find a target with, let's say, a reconnaissance plane. You can bring a drone swarm that is launched from an unmanned surface vehicle, from a boat, within strike distance. Then you can strike the defensive measures of a destroyer with the swarm, and then you run the unmanned surface vehicle, which carries an 800-pound warhead, into the destroyer and finish it. That is what we're enabling, but that requires you to have reconnaissance drones, strike drones, and unmanned surface vehicles all working closely together in tight coordination in a potentially GPS denied, potentially comms denied environment where, for example, you might be able to pre-select the target, but once the unmanned surface vehicle approaches a destroyer, you actually can't control it anymore because it's jammed, and you have to rely on it, on identifying the right targets, and then executing the mission autonomously.
Interesting. I guess, you're talking about this, and a lot of this obviously will be sort of AI powered to a certain degree. Technology is helping, as you said, kind of shrink these time scales. But I'm curious in terms of thinking about the human that will remain in the loop and be sort of, to a certain extent, making decisions around this. Is there a talent piece to all of this? Is there some amount of, a certain kind of specialized talent that we're going to need to see in our future militaries that will be able to operate this?
I honestly think it's mostly the existing command structure, and here's why. At least in Western militaries, the command structure is already objective-based. And the objective in this case would be destroy this target and establish control over this sector with the means appropriate, right? And the commanding higher level officer typically doesn't prescribe the exact type of tactic or munition or approach. And what we're effectively doing is we are using AI and autonomous systems to execute part of these missions, which at first sounds scary, but in Ukraine or in Taiwan or in any near-peer adversary conflict, this is not, we're talking about a relatively clear operating picture. I'm very, very careful and not really convinced about autonomous systems in urban combat or in an anti-terror capacity. I think there are a lot of ethical challenges. As technology evolves, that might get easier, but right now that's a really difficult problem to solve. But what we're discussing here, from Ukraine to Taiwan, those are relatively clear-cut situations where you know where enemy forces are, where there's not really much around them, where there are no civilians around them. And so those situations lean themselves best to having like high-level objectives like destroy an air defense installation, go for a naval asset, and be relatively certain, as long as this is all happening within a geo-position constraint that's like, hey, you can't go outside here, or you have to abort or self-destruct, where this is totally possible. And again, it is not too dissimilar from firing an artillery barrage into the same, into a grid coordinate on land or at sea, because it's in the same way discriminate on position, but indiscriminate on the target that is in that position.
No, thank you for explaining that, Lorenz. It's great to hear you be able to explain to us, from the source, because I think sometimes when we think about drones, the military, it all just seems really, really complicated, but you've broken it down so well for us and for our audience. From a normal person's perspective, how does a regular person get to interact with technologies like these? I know that you can just go to Costco and buy a DJI drone, which obviously you recommend against, given that DJI is from China, but is there a way that the average person can think about these drones and how they might interact with them in the future?
I think the consumer drone example you're making is actually not too dissimilar of the military engagement. And quite frankly, a lot of consumer drones are used on battlefields today. So I think from getting close to the technology perspective, yes, go to Costco and buy an American-made drone, if you find one, and fly them. And in an almost absurd twist, most of the drones that are being used in combat today are actually from drone racing. You could go to a local drone racing club or event, and you can put on the goggles, and you don't see swarms, but you see the view of the drone on the world. And I think it will give you a perspective on why the battlefield is transparent, why you can see everything with them. And also the fact that they go like 60, 80 miles an hour, 100
really
miles an
fast.
hour. They're fast and they're small. And I think all of that will become like so more obvious. And also it's going to be clear to you, well, if the drones in this racing club are the exact same drones that are being used on the battlefield, which they are, I can assure you that, how accessible the technology is and how pervasive and ubiquitous and how, in a way, easy it is to assemble.
I guess maybe we'll have to do a future episode. I've challenged you to a drone race.
Oh my gosh. Maybe Lorenz can come join us in person. We could do a drone race. That would be really, really fun.
I take no responsibility for what happens to my drone when I'm flying at 60 miles an hour.
We did do this at the expo, so hopefully next year's expo, we can also. But no, that's a great idea. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And I guess on the subject of recommendations, as we come to a close, as you probably know, we love to ask everyone for a great Taiwan recommendation. You were just recently there, so I feel like this will hopefully be fresh in your mind. Do you have any good recs for us?
That is actually a hard one because I like to travel very intensely to a lot of countries in the year. So I might be one of the most efficient travelers. I almost never take time for sightseeing. I think what was surprising to me is the food scene is really good. So I would recommend to look for local restaurants. The good ones are always in a mall.
Interesting. Okay.
Do you have a favorite, or even a favorite cuisine or a favorite type of food?
I do not recall the name, so that would be hard. I don't have the one recommendation, but downtown Taipei is fantastic. And then maybe the other fun observation for anybody who hasn't traveled to the country yet is, in a way, it doesn't feel American, but it does feel very accessible to, I would say, American culture. And what I mean with that is, I found the people of Taiwan to be super approachable, super easy to interact with. So if you're looking for a trip to Asia that is culturally really direct and accessible, certainly can recommend Taiwan.
That's a phenomenal endorsement
from the world's most efficient traveler.
Yes. Wow. Okay. Well, now all of our.
You've said that. I just said efficient.
I love to speak in hyperbole. I can't help it.
All right. So next time we'll bring you. We'll all go together on a very efficient trip. We'll do drone racing in Taiwan while eating food in downtown Taipei in one of the malls. So this sounds like a great trip.
Great itinerary.
Lorenz, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us virtually. I know you have a lot on your plate, probably a trip that you need to go on tomorrow. But look forward to continuing to engage with you. You've been an amazing friend to SCSP, and we know that you'll be at the exchange coming up soon. So yeah, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for hosting, and it's always great to talk about national security, the Indo-Pacific, and travel.
All of our favorite topics. All right, see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, other than planning our next drone racing trip with Lorenz, Libby, what was your biggest takeaway from our conversation?
Yeah, I think something that I really learned through the process of this conversation is, we talk a lot about bottlenecks when it comes to building drones. What could be preventing Taiwan from upping its manufacturing capacity? What are those kind of physical constraints? And I think one thing that Lorenz really hammered home is a lot of it just comes down to just doing it, right? Yeah. Just saying, okay, we are going to invest this much money to set up these manufacturing lines that actually may not take as long as we think, may not require as much capital as we think, and just setting really ambitious goals, aiming high and seeing what can be done.
Yeah, I mean, and as we mentioned, Taiwan is a manufacturing powerhouse. There should not be a reason why they can't do this, and so it's really encouraging that they are at least thinking through how to get there, even if we think some of their goals are not ambitious enough at the moment. But yeah, I definitely think if the signs are on the wall that say, hey, this is something that needs to be done, I definitely think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious what you are going to be taking away from the conversation.
Yeah, other than, of course, that willpower boost, what Lorenz has made clear in our conversation, in his work over the last few years, obviously with Ukraine, this is not something that Taiwan can do alone, right? This is why the threats that we're facing, as we at SCSP talk about all the time, are connected, right? The United States needs to work with Taiwan on this issue, not just because Taiwan can't build up their own drone capabilities, right? Actually, I do think they can, but it's helpful to have these partnerships with the United States, with European companies. I mean, Auterion is based in the US and Germany, right? It's good to have these partnerships, both so we can all learn as allies and partners from our experiences in other parts of the world, but also because we are all on the same side. We're all facing this shared threat. So by bringing our efforts together, I just think, what Loren said about deterrence, that's going to make it just that much stronger.
Yeah, so the equation, I guess, is something like willpower plus partnerships equals drone capacity.
Yeah, and again, it's something that we're already seeing. Again, Auterion's doing phenomenal work. I'm really, really glad that they're able to work with the Taiwanese government, and now that Lorenz has also shared, right, with Korea, Japan. I mean, these are all U.S. allies, really important partnerships in the Indo-Pacific. And as we move forward into the tail end of this decade that we've started off, at SCSP, I think it just goes to show that, allies and partners, they're important. 10 companies that have been supporting the work of our men and women in uniform, really, really important. And so, again, really exciting to see where the drone industry ends up going. But I think we're all moving in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely an info-dense episode of Strait Forward today, but we have many more exciting episodes in the pipeline, so keep your eyes out for some, a broad range of topics.
I do want to do a quick shout-out for the AI plus autonomy event that we're hosting in Austin at the end of this week. On September 25th, SCSP is hosting the fourth exchange on national security, and Lorenz will be there. So if you liked our conversation, please meet him in person and join us in Austin at the end of this week. But with that, I think thanks to our listeners. Thank you to Lorenz. And we look straight forward to seeing you next time. Bye.